How often do we pause to consider the real costs and benefits behind the cloud services that we use every day? Well, today we're going to go beyond the surface with Steen Dalgas, and he's a cloud economist at Nutanix. We're going to unravel the intricacy of cloud economics together today and talk about it in language that everyone can understand. Because we're going to dive into how Nutanix roots in Google's innovative infrastructure technology are actually revolutionizing cloud cost efficiency for businesses, and also shed light on the critical role of environmental, social and governance factors. Yes, ESG. Those factors are becoming so important in today's IT decisions, and I want to dig a little bit deeper on that and learn more about how Nutanix is helping lead the charge towards sustainable cloud solutions. And with the rise of hybrid and multi-cloud environments, I'm hoping we can also discuss the evolving challenges and opportunities that all these platforms present. So yes, I cordially invite you to join me as we uncover the economic and environmental layers of cloud technology that are shaping the future of IT. This is something I don't think we talk about enough. Now, before I get today's guests on, it's time for me to mention the sponsors of Tech Talks Daily. And in an era where digital security is non-negotiable, legacy managed file transfer tools, they simply don't cut it now. So that's where Kiteworks comes in, revolutionizing the MFT landscape with unparalleled security credentials, including the much coveted FedRAMP moderate authorization. This isn't just about compliance though, it's about offering a secure, efficient platform for today's remote workforce. So with Kiteworks, you can benefit from advanced file sharing, email security and customizable integrations, all within a platform designed to safeguard your most sensitive data. So don't let outdated technology compromise your security. Step into the future of secure managed file transfer. Get started today by going to kiteworks.com. That's kiteworks.com, where security meets sophistication. But now it's time to get today's guests on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where you can sit down and enjoy a great conversation about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Steen. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks very much, Neil. So, my name is Steen Dalgas. I have a great job title, Cloud Economist, and it wasn't a job that I dreamed about doing when I was a kid, but it is a dream job for me now. So my background is a little bit unusual for somebody who's front of house in an IT vendor. I come from an accounting background, so I was a chartered accountant. I then got into the IT asset finance industry at a very large multinational, so did that for about 20 years until that job and that whole part of the business got eliminated. So it was on the back of the Enron accounting scandal the way that IT companies used to go to market in the 90s was they would sell their hardware and software solutions with a finance bundle, and that would be an operating lease. So I was responsible for that. So packaging up software services and hardware as an operating lease. And then because Enron we've made people aware that actually operating leasing was really a form of financial cheating. It got outlawed in 2016. And I can remember going to a chartered accountants conference, which doesn't sound very exciting, but I can still remember the day today. When I went to this, I realized that my job was going to disappear. And so what I did was I then had to look for something else to do. And rather luckily, I came across Nutanix a short period later. And when I joined Nutanix, it was a sort of unique opportunity because it was my boss at the time, Andrew Brinded, who's now our chief revenue officer, sort of said to me, Steen, we don't quite know what we need you to do. Go and talk to our customers. And so I was actually given the opportunity to basically choose my own role. And that's how we came up with the Cloud Economist. So that's what I do now, Neil.
Wow, what an incredible story and a great job title too. I'd love to see you at Passport Control when you say the words Cloud Economist. Well, it was an incredibly cool title, isn't it?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'd like to say I invented it. We came across it on the internet. There were a couple of cloud economists before us, but what I keep saying to I've got teenage kids. The jobs. There's all these new cool job titles coming out, prompt engineers and so on. And So exciting times for our kids when they go into the world of work. There's going to be a whole bunch of new jobs out there. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what the Cloud Economist actually does, what it means shortly.
No problem at all. I'm sure you get some cool dad points with that job title too. And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today is Nutanix has been recognised as somewhat of a disruptor in the tech industry, especially in hyper-converged infrastructure, or HCI. So I've got to ask, how does this foundational technology contribute to advancing cloud economics and IT sustainability? Because I feel there's a big story here.
There absolutely is. And I remember, because I sort of came from like the legacy world of IT vendors, sort of like the proprietary world. And when the concept of Nutanix was explained to me, I was absolutely blown away. And really, what sort of brought it alive to me was the sort of origin story. So if you think about like superheroes, they have their origin story, the origin story of Nutanix, so where we actually came from. So if you understand that, then you start to understand a little bit more about what we're really about. And where we came from was, if you go back to early 2000s, so as with it, so the internet was just sort of in its sort of nascent form. The dominant search engineer was Yahoo.
Yeah.
And there you had Google coming along saying, yeah, we'd like to, knock you off your perch, Yahoo. We think we could come up with something a lot better. And what they did was they did some sort of corporate sort of discovery to find out how Yahoo was running its IT. And what Yahoo was doing was it was running its search engines using what we call traditional IT architecture, which is where you have your servers, and then you have separate storage array, and they were using NetApp filers for their storage. And then you connect the two with a storage area network. So this was the traditional 3-tier architecture. Now, the problem with that was they effectively had like a little cluster for each part of the world using the internet. You had like your own little cluster. And what it meant was only a few of those clusters would sort of lit up at any one time as different parts of the world were using the internet. So it was an incredibly inefficient way to run infrastructure, because you're only using 10% of the resources at any one time, but you're having to pay for 100%. So the folks at Google took a huge risk, and they said, well, we need to go and architecture something completely different. And they spent 4 years coming up with what's now called the Google File System, which is the original architecture, which is now called web scale, used by all of the major hyperscalers. And what they did was, so they took an x86 server and they put the storage into the server. So this is the sort of foundational hyper-converged infrastructure, and eliminated the SAN from the architecture. And so the idea was you could present the storage as a single pool. So no longer did you have to have individual clusters. You could just have one supercluster. And if you needed more capacity, it could just scale out linearly. And so what it meant was, from a cost point of view, it was dramatically cheaper. But then what they did was even smarter, was they were the sort of leader, the sort of early adapters of the software-defined approach to running data center infrastructure. And so they brought a high level of automation. And so what they realized was, if you were running IT the way that Yahoo was doing, so as you scaled up, you're going to need more and more storage administrators. And so pretty soon you'd find, if you really scaled, there were not going to be enough storage administrators in the world to run all the IT that you needed to run the public cloud. And but by taking this approach, they needed dramatically fewer people to run their infrastructure. And there was an analyst for Storage Mojo did a really great write-up on this whole story, and they worked out that it was not, so Google's IT was about 9 times cheaper. So it's about 9 times cheaper to run the infrastructure using Google than Yahoo. So from a cost point of view, it gave them a massive cost competitive advantage. But they also had a great competitive advantage in terms of revenue, because they could scale linearly. It was really easy to add capacity, easy to add new software features. So they were able to respond more quickly to the market and bring in new features and suck in more advertising dollars. So they also won in terms of the innovation war as well. Yeah, and so what happened was Google absolutely smashed the competition. Yahoo ended up being bought out and is now a subsidiary of another conglomerate, sort of tucked away. It's still around Yahoo, but it's, Google was the massive winner there. And so the big takeaway from that is that if you get the right IT platform, it can be a massive advantage from a competitive point of view. Now, how does that all relate to Nutanix, that great story? Well, the people who built this Google file system said, well, we can take this hyper-converged infrastructure approach to the enterprise market. And so two of those data scientists got together with our founder CEO, Dheeraj, who came from Oracle, to create Nutanix. So Nutanix is that same web scale architecture that Google successfully used, but you can now run your private cloud the same way that the hyperscalers run theirs. So that's where we've come from, is this whole disruptive approach. And if you get the right platform, it can deliver some incredible economics for customers. So that's where we've come from.
Incredibly cool. And I was talking about Cloud Economist a few moments ago. It is a relatively new area, but critical in today's digital landscape. So can you tell me a bit more about the role and importance of Cloud Economists in helping businesses maybe navigate some of these complexities that we're talking about around cloud deployments and sustainability?
So my background was, when I was in the asset finance world, I used to do a lot of business cases, and those business cases would be ROI type business cases. And that's because at the time, the sort of dominant way that businesses were run from a financial perspective was shareholder value. And shareholder value is a sort of Milton Friedman sort of term, and he published an article all about this. And literally what it means is, can I save the company money? And it's purely focused on optimizing the profitability for the shareholder. But what we've seen is, so in the last 10 years, there's a growth in stakeholder value. And stakeholder value means you need to look at things that so profit is important, but there's also other things that are really important as well, as a recognition around risk, that risk is really important in driving innovation. And these are all aligned to some of the goals that cloud is trying to solve. So, and the best way to measure that is TCO. And as a disruptor, so we recognized in Nutanix was that really we needed to make TCO a key part of how we engage with our customers. Because what we were trying to do was disrupt the status quos and bias. So there's a huge amount of bias in companies. And what we find is like lots of customers either will think that native cloud is the right way to go, or they're in love with storage, or they've got their own personal biases, their own opinions. And what we're trying to do with a TCO is really come in and challenge that and so what Cloud Economists will do is I'll create a business case, and I'll compare the different choices, and I'll break it from an accounting point of view. We'll break the business case into your CapEx, OpEx over time. So how does the solution scale with growth? We model that out. And what we try and do is we translate features and benefits, and we sort of say it's good to sort of state those. The techies love their features and benefits, but what does that actually mean from a business point of view? So what I'm trying to do is translate those features and benefits into financial value that can be measured. And so what we try and do is we measure the value using, and the best way to measure it is if I can get a third-party invoice or a quote. And if I don't have those, then what I'll try to do is get estimates from, let's say, other customers who've seen benefits. I try and quantify those and bring those into the business case as well. And so by delivering a TCO as part of our engagement with a vendor, we end up with a much more valuable engagement, because that vendor, that customer will then really understand, well, how is this solution going to help my company? And so we take great pride in building out an accurate, trustworthy TCO. And then what we do for certain customers is we also do look backs. So if they've made the investment into Nutanix and we sort of have built this business case, we come back a couple of years later and we say, well, did we deliver on what we said we would? And those look backs can be incredibly illuminating. So to give you a couple of examples of one. So one we did was with a systems integrator, and what they had done was so for them, what was really important was the level of automation. So out of the task of running IT, you can imagine what a systems integrator is trying to do is run someone's IT more efficiently than they could do it themselves. So for them, what they had done was they'd measured out every single business process involved in running IT. And what we said was what we would automate, and we came up with a figure that we would automate percentage of those, and that would translate into fewer people needed to run IT. And when we came back, we validated that a couple of years later. It was, did we deliver on what we said we would? And, generally, what we try to do is we try to be conservative in the TCOs and then under-promising and over-delivering. Be incredibly illuminating. Another customer, financial services customer, and what we did there was they had a Nutanix virtualized estate, and then they had a physical estate. And what we did was we looked at what position that Nutanix virtualized estate was. And we went through and looked at was the hardware up to date? Was the software versions, all the operating systems all up to date? And then we compared that with the physical environments. And what it sort of demonstrated to us, which was all red, was it sort of helped to demonstrate, we promised that if you have a Nutanix environment, it's very simple to manage. It's easy to keep up to date. You need far less people to manage it. And so in this particular customer where they had a Nutanix environment and a non-Nutanix environment, and we could do this look back, it gave us like a sort of like almost like a perfect scientific experiment where you could see the results. And you could see that the nightmare that was managing physical infrastructure versus managing our sort of virtualized, highly automated Nutanix estate. So what we're trying to do very simply is provide data points to prove. So if we're making a promise or a statement, can we back that up with data? And so that's the Cloud Economist job.
And it's so refreshing to hear you talking about under-promising and over-delivering in almost every area of life right now. It seems to be the opposite in many situations. So it's great to hear that.
And also, Neil, we're in like a post-truth world. So
yes.
It's like, so can you actually provide the data and evidence? Is it, and I think that's really important in today's world as well. So.
Yeah, 100% with you. And just to further bring to life everything that you're talking about here, especially for business leaders listening around the world and this significant shift that we're seeing towards hybrid multi-cloud architectures, is there anything you can share around how you assist organizations in helping balance that need for things like cost efficiency, performance, sustainability into their cloud strategies? Because again, it can feel for a lot of people listening that they're spinning a lot of plates, and it's a huge balancing act, isn't it?
It's a massive balancing act. And the problem is you're so busy in the doing, you're not taking the opportunity to sort of step away and actually ask yourself, are you actually going in the right direction? And if I was to summarize, I say most of our customers are in this sort of transition period where they're going from what we call the old world, this old sort of legacy world of IT, and they're moving to this sort of new promised land of cloud. And they've gone from the old world, it was not very inefficient, but it was pretty stable. And the world they're heading towards is going to be stable, but they're in this sort of unstable period. And so if I was to say like the old world of IT, it's a very simple world. It was CIO's job was to run all the apps and make sure that they were on. So keeping the lights on and to try and do it relatively cheaply. Whereas now, the role of IT has become strategic to the business. So IT is responsible for delivering and helping to drive innovation in the business, trying to reduce cost, not just in IT, but reducing cost across the business. And then I would say this is the most important, is to future-proof the business. And so, for example, we've just gone through the pandemic where you had like so really, terrible event thrust upon businesses that they had to respond to. So we've gone from like a 25 year period of relatively calm to we're now in, I'd say, a period of massive uncertainty. We've got all sorts of threats, geopolitical instabilities and climate change. There's a huge amount of threats out there. So IT is being asked to sort of future-proof the business so we can react against whatever's thrown at us. And like I'm gonna throw in another like risk, so which Nutanix has been shouting about, which is vendor risk. So if you're too closely aligned to a vendor, and what we've been hearing from a lot of our sort of customers is that they have been too reliant on one particular vendor in the virtualization space, which is our direct competitor. And now that competitor has been acquired and the pricing models have changed. So they found themselves now in positions where they're having to pay a lot more for their virtualization software than they were previously. So there's lots of challenges out there. So what Nutanix has been building out. So for the last 10 years, we made a bet. So this is our founder, Dheeraj, was that the world was going to become multi-cloud, and that customers were going to go towards a world where you weren't just going to be in one public cloud and that was going to be it. But actually, it was going to be much more messy than that. You were going to have an edge cloud, private cloud, and that actually the business would need multiple different clouds. So you would, and be driven by business requirements. So, for example, if you're in data analytics, you might want Google Cloud, or if you might want certain features available in AWS Cloud or Azure Cloud, depending on the application that that the business particularly needed. So businesses were going to end up multi-cloud by accident, and this complexity would need management. So what we've been doing is working in Nutanix is to build a genuine hybrid multi-cloud model. And by multi-cloud, and this is the uniqueness of Nutanix, is what we mean is you run all of your clouds wherever they are with exactly the same consistent operating model and the same consistent set of data services. So that's the sort of what we've been building out to help customers. And as part of that is to make it easy. And so I've talked about that sort of journey that customers are on, moving from the old world to the new cloud world. So how can we help accelerate that journey to make it quicker, less risky, and addressing the stability piece? Because whilst you're in that transition phase, you're at risk of things like, from a security point of view, you're exposed. So how can we, and regulation challenges. So we're seeing, for example, the DORA regulation in Europe, where customers have to sort of demonstrate their ability not to be locked into particular cloud vendors. So if I'm supposed to summarize, what we've been trying to do is build out this hybrid multi-cloud platform, and that can make this whole world simple, to give customers choice so you can choose the right cloud for the right business reason, and then to provide this consistent set of data services, because your data is going to be your crown jewels for your organization. So how can we help you protect that data and be able to move the data where you need to in order to maintain your competitiveness? So that's the sort of Nutanix story around multi-cloud, Neil.
Fantastic. And another big topic I'd love to explore with you today, especially in a world where ESG scores are increasingly important to business leaders. The pursuit for things like net zero emissions, they require direct action rather than just reliance on offsetting. So how do you at Nutanix approach cloud solutions and IT sustainability? And how do you align with goals like this? Because it must be something that you're increasingly talking with your customers about. And are there any particular initiatives that you can share around this?
So if I answer that question in terms of, well, what are we doing ourselves internally?
Yeah.
And then also what's happening in the market. So I touched briefly on the sort of change from shareholder value focus to stakeholder value focus. So what happened was, it was really sort of, just to give you some sort of, and listeners, historical context. So around sort of like 2019, 2020, there was a big change in the shareholder investor community in terms of like there's been a sort of wrestling about what's the best way for organizations to run themselves. And it's actually, because of my accountancy background, I've been sort of all over this, I really sort of got the topic. And there was a view that the traditional way that companies were reporting their financial results was not giving the true proper reflection on the business and the business risks. So if you're just reporting pure numbers, profit and loss, you're not telling a full story. And this is seeing the rise of ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. And so what that means is it's really that what the investor community wanted was to understand more about the businesses. So they needed to report more data in a more consistent way. And actually, there's a recognition that, so this is like from a risk point of view, that environmental and social performance and governance really matter, because they can sort of highlight potential risk factors that could come in and hit companies down the line. And so the the major investment community started to really get behind this. And this has now become the predominant way that companies are investing. And there was a recognition that the whole sort of energy transition was going to become a massive issue. And so having watched this, as sort of being aware of this, it was really, so how was Nutanix going to respond to this, to the big change in the market? Because what we see is that this is going to be a change that's going to be here for at least the next 20 years. So we're going through this energy transition, and then we're also facing this crisis, a pending crisis around climate. And IT is right at the center of this. So one of the facts, the more I sort of dug into this, I was shocked. For example, I went through a period of not flying, Neil, because I was worried about my carbon footprint, or flying a lot less. And I then discovered, well, actually, the IT industry was emitting at least as much CO2 emissions as the airline industry. So, shock straight away. So we're actually part of the, massive part of the problem. And then if you look at, with AI coming downstream, it was just going to get worse and worse. So we were, so it's just like really sort of highlighted we needed to do something. Well, the good news is what attracted me to Nutanix was, fundamentally the problems that Nutanix was solving, which is, when I talked about the Google story, we were optimizing resources, we were simplifying. So all of that was fundamentally cutting down the amount of emissions. We're making IT more efficient, consuming less energy. So I felt there was a really positive story. And what we did as a company was we decided to drink our own Kool-Aid. And we went through a project to move all of Nutanix onto our own infrastructure platform. And we have consolidated mainly into 2 data centers. Actually, so if we look at the energy that we are emitting as a company, so around 78% of our total direct electricity consumed actually comes from our data centers. So within our particular organization, the data centers are the biggest part of that. From the scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are the easiest to measure, it's the biggest part of of our carbon emissions. And so what we did was we tried to make that as efficient as possible. And what we realized was we couldn't do it by ourselves. We had to partner. And so we partnered firstly with a data center company to help optimize from an energy and water perspective, because water is a huge part. So IT uses a huge amount of water for cooling, to run the air conditioners, because data servers only run. So if it gets too hot, above 29 degrees, then servers tend to switch off, which is not very good for customers because they start to fail. So they have to be cooled down to a certain temperature. And so we partnered with a great data center company. And what we also did was we partnered with a company called N0. And this is really quite groundbreaking. What N0 would do was help us understand what energy was available in the grid, so that we could intelligently and run our IT based on optimizing when there was most renewables available in the grid. And so we've been able to get our emissions down through using software intelligence to optimize how we are consuming our own energy. So now I think based on our last report, I think it's around 3/4 of our direct energy consumption was coming from a genuinely renewables base. So we were looking at when renewables were available in the grid and targeting our processing around those time periods to make sure we're maximizing some renewables. So we have drunk our own Kool-Aid internally. Now, what we would say is that's a start, and we want to get better, and it's a journey. And each year we've got better, and we're becoming more transparent in terms of how we report. So that's what we've been doing ourselves. Does that help?
Yeah, it really does. And what I found particularly interesting there as well is that I think it was the 2022 UN Climate Panel. Their report highlighted the urgent need for global cooperation and significant changes to combat climate change. And as you were talking there, your own personal story about the difference you can make by, I don't know how many cars you've got, how much air travel you make. And I think it's really interesting. And what I found particularly interesting there as well is that I think it was the 2022 UN Climate Panel. They report highlighted the urgent need for global cooperation and significant changes to combat climate change. And as you were talking there, your own personal story about the difference you can make by, I don't know how many cars you've got, how much air travel you make. And as a result, sustainability is such a huge imperative. But one of the things that we don't always talk about is things like AI and crypto and IT infrastructure. There's a huge need for green tech out there, isn't it?
There is, absolutely. And so what I think, so the next thing is really is that there needs to be an industry way of tackling this problem.
Yeah.
So it can't be Nutanix. We're an ecosystem player. And I think what was clear to me is as I've gone into the topic, it's about an ecosystem all coming together.
Yeah.
So, and all being, actually, if you read our latest ESG report, our CEO, Rajiv, talks about personal responsibility, but also, we all have to be personally responsible. And that's not just in our personal lives, but in what we do in our companies and how we treat this topic, how we engage with our customers, how we bring this mindset to how we go about achieving our sort of business goals for the year. We bring this mindset to how we go to work, which I absolutely love that. So from an industry perspective, it's about working together in an ecosystem. So what that means is, so from an Nutanix point of view, so we're the software layer. So what we need to work with efficient hardware or cloud companies who are providing that infrastructure layer. We need to work with partners in the organization. So that this will be resellers such as, the computer centers, Softcats, CDWs, like the big resellers we have in the UK who we partner with. And we know take this very seriously. And our customers as well need to bring their own, bring their best game to the town, because we can give the most sustainable solution possible in the market, but they need to use it in the right sort of way. So I describe that as being, I've got a car and I always have the miles per gallon set, and I'm trying to optimize that in terms of how I drive. So customers need to set things up in the right way to optimize from a sustainability point of view. So we all have to work together. And there's a great motivational video that Richard Curtis did, which is the Al Pacino speech about inches. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see that, Neil, but it's phenomenal. It's like a sort of 5-minute motivational speech about that we really all need to get our act together. And so the Tech UK do a sort of industry gathering around sustainability, and those sorts of events, they matter. And what we all need to do is be committed to transparency of data and being honest about our data. And I'll give you an example of a bugbear that I've got.
Yeah.
Am I okay to raise a bugbear?
Yeah, so absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Okay. So if we look at the car industry, so the car industry have worked out that embedded emissions are huge. And these are the emissions when you buy a new car, it comes with, so the emissions that are required in the manufacturing process are very high. And then it has to be shipped around the world. And I worked out that actually, if you were, and there's analysis that's done that if you're buying an electric car, it was not break even from an emissions point of view until like year 7 or 8.
Wow.
Because of the impact of the embedded emissions. Now, the data I've seen from IT hardware manufacturers around embedded emissions is that it's only 10 to 11% of the life cycle. Whereas the car industry are saying it's between 40 to 50% of the total life cycle are in that manufacturing process. Now, this is where I'm a sort of data-driven and biased point of view, but I just frankly don't believe that 10 to 11% figure as being accurate. I don't believe it. So I think what we need are IT hardware manufacturers to be honest about this. And I do think I've seen, so one of the cloud vendors, and some of the cloud vendors, what they're doing is looking to extend out the lifespan of IT. So it's clearly, if you're in the business of selling IT hardware, and if you're extending out the life, that's not great for business.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you really are genuinely want to solve this problem, then extending out the life is the answer. And looking at reusing parts where parts make sense, because if you reuse parts, they come with zero embedded emissions or very little. So there needs to be, I think, a rethink on the hardware side of the industry.
Absolutely. And not just the hardware. That I was reading, I think it was last month, that the boom of AI that everyone's excited about at the moment, Microsoft have used something like 22 billion litres of water in 2022 to power AI, and Google 7 billion, and that number's just going to keep increasing. But on the kind of difference that we can make, and you can help make for your clients as well, how do you enable your customers achieve their sustainability goals, particularly in terms of reducing CO2 emissions and optimizing their energy use? Is there anything you can share around that, and just for any business leader listening today?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time on this. And again, I was just trying to break it all down. So if I break down the elements of, so from an IT infrastructure point of view, what contributes to emissions? So from the hardware side, so I've talked about embedded emissions. And then you have the emissions when you're running equipment in a data center. And you have there's the emissions around the data center itself, and then there's the emissions in the rack. So what I've uncovered is we've got so the data center itself is a massive part, because what I talked about was the need to cool IT.
Yeah.
And so you have to run these big air conditioning units. And so the challenge there is that in the cooling, it uses a lot of electricity, and the more inefficient the data center, the more electricity you need to cool. Mm. And if you're running an old data center, and the way that we measure it is something called PUE, so power utility effect. And so the industry average for like a decent vendor is about 1.5. So this is so what that means is if I'm emitting 1 kilowatt hour of electricity at the rack, I need another 50% on top to cool it, okay, in a standard data center. But if you've got a very old data center or you're using a server room, that PUE might be 3, 4, or 5. And so what that means is that you're having to incur a lot more electricity to cool that because you're running an inefficient data center. And we have got a ton of these inefficient data centers running around in the UK, especially in the public sector. So what I quickly worked out was, unless you're one of the very few large corporates who've got, huge budgets to run your own data center, it's absolute madness to run your own data center. So straight away, if you want to do something, plan to exit the data center, your own data center, as soon as possible. And then the answer really should be either co-location, which is what I think Nutanix went down to. We partnered with a data center expert, or public cloud. So using a public cloud or a bare metal provider who's a specialist and has invested in a tier for a highest efficiency data center, because that can make a really big impact. So what Nutanix can also help is, so we have a very small form factor, which I think I described to you, because we're just putting the infrastructure into an x86 server, so you no longer need a separate storage array. So we've been able to shrink the footprint. So what you'll see is a much lower consumption of electricity at the rack. So what I talked about was the need to have, cooling efficiency in the data center, but you also need to have efficiency at the rack as well. And then what we also did was we then went out and extended further by looking at, well, how could we optimize by taking advantage of energy at the grid? And that's where, if you're in partnership with a co-location provider, you can do that. And because Nutanix we're operating at scale, we can do that. But what I would say is this is probably not your business, which is why I think utilizing public cloud and giving it to specialists, it probably makes a lot of sense. So I think accelerating going into public cloud makes sense. However, there's others. I just want to sort of highlight, there's another sort of like fly in the ointment here, which is the grid. So understanding the grid impact in terms of sustainability. Now, if we look at a countrywide level, so different countries use different amounts of renewables energy, and the more renewables you use, the greener your electricity. Now, within Europe, if you look at it on a countrywide basis, UK is sort of somewhere in the middle. Poland is the worst. So the more you're using coal for your electricity, the worse you are in terms of emissions. So Poland uses a lot of coal, so they're not very good. So I can remember sitting with a CIO who was going to put a data center into Poland. Mm-hmm. And I said, by doing that, you're increasing your emissions by 10x versus putting it in somewhere like Germany. So that's like another consideration to think about, where is my data center going to be? So thinking about what's the grid like? How efficient is that country? And countries can change. This is all going to change over time. These emissions can change on a daily basis, and countries are gradually becoming more efficient. The Nordics, will not surprise you, are the sort of leaders in Europe. They've got the cleanest energy, so the lowest emission factors. But it also changes. So, for example, within the UK, where your data center is, for example, if you're up in Scotland, they have more renewables up there. So actually having a data center in Scotland makes more sense than having one down in the south. So down in the south, we've got less renewables. So actually, you could even argue that maybe public cloud might need to try harder, because a lot of their data centers are in the south where they're using less green energy. So it's a pretty complex topic, Neil.
It really is. And I think the Enterprise Cloud Index report indicates a growing trend towards diverse IT infrastructure, further overcomplicating everything. So I've got to ask, what challenges do organizations face in managing these environments? You must be speaking to a lot of big businesses around the world. And how are you helping them simplify some of this complexity?
So when I talked about multi-cloud before, I said, so companies are ending up with this sort of accidental multi-cloud.
Yeah.
And multi-cloud means you're in multiple clouds, and each cloud, you're going to need a specialist team with specialist skills to run those environments. And getting hold of the skills is a massive challenge. Getting visibility of all these environments is a massive challenge, and keeping them secure. And you'll typically have shadow IT. You'll have folks going off and spinning up their own workloads in public cloud, and trying to keep a track of all of this is a nightmare. So what we were all about was trying to create this standardized operating model, standardized way of running your data. By having the standardized model, you have one set of skills to run multiple clouds. And literally just today, Google announced that they were going to offer bare metal services. So this is like another cloud that Nutanix can run and operate in. So you could run workloads in Google, AWS, in Azure, and in your private cloud, but with a single team and having a single visibility. So that's what we've built out, or building out in the case of Google. So that's going to require more work to build out. But that's what Nutanix has been building towards, this single standardized operating model for multi-cloud, which we think will bring huge benefits for our customers in terms of accelerating innovation, giving them the agility and being able to respond to unexpected change, and making the organization more secure.
Well, we started the podcast talking about your background, your own personal origin story will put you on this path. And if I now ask you to look back as we come full circle at some of your extensive experience in things like asset financing and understanding the business value of cloud solutions, how do you see the financial models for cloud deployments evolving, especially in light of things like sustainability and ESG considerations? Because again, another big balancing act, right?
Yeah, so I think we're on the verge of another change in a big, a revolution coming in IT. So the way that, so if I look at sort of customers, the way that they've bought IT, investing in new IT is pretty time consuming, complex. How do I go out and find the right solution? Where do I find it? And what we're seeing, what I believe is what we're going to see a lot more of is marketplaces. So the marketplaces sort of led by the hyperscalers. So this is AWS and Azure. And so what the genius of Amazon has been to make things really easy to buy. We know how dangerous it is, how easy it is to buy stuff on Amazon, sort of a frictionless purchase. And what they've been doing is building out the capability so that you can buy IT solutions in the same way. So you can go in, you've got a standardized contract, and you can buy multiple vendor solutions all through the marketplace. So this is going to be, I think, the next big change. And what it means is it gives transparency. Your pricing's there. Everybody can see it. Is fantastic. So you're going to have to, and I think that's only going to benefit the consumer, is the more you can be transparent. And what it's also, from a Nutanix point of view, is what we're about is choice. So what we want to do is, as part of this, being part of this marketplace, is also offer. So we made our license fully portable. So what that means is you can buy your license in one cloud, but potentially do the purchase through your Amazon cloud, but potentially take that same license and redeploy that elsewhere in the future. So you're not necessarily tied in, but it's a way of, you can buy your solution through the marketplace. So we think it's going to be, so the marketplace is going to be the next big sort of like big change, I think, coming in how IT is consumed.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Steen, for taking the time out of your day to demystify the world of cloud economics, ESG, sustainability, and hybrid multi-cloud. It is an incredibly complex arena, but you've done a fantastic job of talking about it in a language that everyone can understand today. And before I let you go, though, I'm going to ask you to leave one final gift for everybody listening. And that is a question I always ask my guests, is a book that means something to you that we can add to our Amazon wish list, or a song that we can add to our Spotify playlist. I don't mind which, but what would you like to leave everyone listening with, and why?
Okay. So I just thought, I've got the book in front of me, actually. So I read this. It was The Everything Store by Brad Stone. And it was a story about Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's an absolutely unbelievably brilliant book, a business book. It's just really, so for me, it was transformative in terms of, the mindset that Amazon brought and where they came from, how they reacted to changes. And then they had this accidental business model for AWS that came out of nowhere. I just have learned so much from that book, and I keep rereading it. So have a read of that book.
Awesome. I'll get that added straight to the Amazon wish list. And for anyone listening, wanting to dig a little bit deeper on some of the things we talked about today, obviously Nutanix is a huge website. Anywhere in particular you'd like anyone to check out, or how they can contact you or your team, etc., where would you like to point everyone?
So I know folks like to do their own research, and maybe going around a website's not that exciting. And lots of our customers are sort of techie based. So we have got a phenomenal Nutanix University channel on YouTube, and there's so much good stuff there. So I would send people there, but come and engage directly with us. We've got 25 cloud economists in Nutanix. They'd love to come and what I've talked about is, let's try and make that real for if you're a vendor or a partner, or you want to sort of learn more, engage with happily engage with the Cloud Economist team. So we'd love to work with you.
Awesome. Well, I also do a blog post on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, and I do a blog post for this episode. I'll embed one of those videos there as well, just to whet the appetite of everybody that's going to be checking that out. And there's so much we've covered today, from understanding the business case for today's cloud and the Cloud Economist's main roles, from helping customers establish a business case for a particular cloud solution and ultimately helping them understand how they want to pay for it, whether it be capital expenditure or using consumption-based as a service model, and all the ESG and sustainability field. We could have talked for another couple of hours on this, but just thank you for demystifying it today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Steele, for your time.
Wow, we really covered a lot of ground there, didn't we? From the financial intricacies of cloud technology to the pressing need for sustainability in IT operations. And Steen provided us with a real deep dive into how Nutanix is not only enhancing cloud efficiency, but also leading the way with responsibility in that ESG arena. And as we wrap up today, let's think about how the evolution of cloud services impacts not just the business operations, but also our environment. And what steps can your organisation take to balance efficiency and sustainability in its cloud practices? And as we highlighted in the conversation today, it's a hugely complex area, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and invite you to share your ideas on this. I think the only way we can make the world a better place and improve business processes and IT infrastructure, etc., is by us all pooling our resources and ideas together. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @Neil C. Hughes. I invite you to stay connected and continue to engage and explore how technology can solve real-world problems. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep sending in your messages, and hopefully we can make the world a better place. But I also cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow. We've got another guest and a completely different topic to explore together. So hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow, but thank you for listening today, and until next time, don't be a stranger.